1942, one of Japan's most brilliant military strategists was asked a simple question. Admiral Yamamoto, after Pearl Harbor, why don't we just invade America? He went quiet. Then he said something that has haunted military planners ever since. I would find a rifle behind every blade of grass. He never tried. And the reason why? It has almost nothing to do with America's military. Let's start with a question that sounds almost stupid on the surface. Why can't you invade the United States? I mean, people invade countries all the time. Russia invaded Ukraine. The US itself has launched dozens of military operations on foreign soil. History is soaked in the blood of nations that fell to outside forces. So what makes America different? Most people, if you ask them, will say because America has the biggest military in the world. And look, that's not wrong. The US spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. It has 11 aircraft carrier strike groups. The next closest nation has 2. America has roughly 800 military bases in over 70 countries. But here's the thing. That is not the reason. Or rather, it is a reason. Just not the reason. Because if you actually dig into the history, if you talk to the strategists and war planners who've war-gamed this exact scenario, you start to realize something uncomfortable. America has a protection system so layered, so deeply embedded in its geography, its culture, and yes, its civilians, that a successful land invasion is not just difficult, it is structurally impossible. And when I say structurally impossible, I want to be precise about that. I'm not being patriotic, I'm being mathematical. Let me show you what I mean. First, the geography. You want to invade the United States? You have 2 choices, the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. The Pacific is 12,000 miles wide at its broadest point. Even at its narrowest, crossing from Asia, you're looking at roughly 5,000 miles of open water. Now think about what that means logistically. You can't just move an army across an ocean. You need ships, thousands of ships, cargo vessels, troop transports, fuel tankers, and every single one of those ships is trackable, detectable by satellite, by radar, by submarine sonar. The U.S. Navy operates the most advanced submarine fleet in the world. Their job, among other things, is to make the ocean lethal for enemy vessels before they ever get close. We're talking about a logistics nightmare that would take years to plan. And at no point during those years of preparation would it go unnoticed. But okay, let's say, for argument's sake, you somehow manage the ocean crossing. You've evaded the Navy. You've landed troops on American soil. Now what? Now things get much worse for you. The United States is the 3rd largest country on Earth by land area. It contains every major terrain type: deserts, mountain ranges, dense forests, plains that stretch for hundreds of miles. Most of Western Europe, the place where the 2 biggest land wars in modern history were fought, fits inside the continental US with room to spare. And terrain matters. Ask any military strategist. You can have a superior army and lose because the ground you're fighting on is working against you. The Appalachian Mountains alone stretch over 1,500 miles from Alabama to Maine. They are not crossable by conventional armored vehicles without using specific highly defensible passes. The Mississippi River, America's central artery, acts as a natural dividing line that would force any invading force to either flank thousands of miles north or south, or attempt a crossing under fire. This isn't theory. Military planners call this strategic depth, and the US has more of it than almost any country in human history. But here is where things take a genuinely dark turn for any would-be invader. Because the terrain isn't even the hard part. There are more civilian-owned guns in the United States than there are people. Let that sink in. Over 400 million firearms in private hands, legally owned by civilians. For context, the entire active military of the United States is about 1.3 million personnel. The National Guard adds another 800,000. The Army Reserve, another 750,000. Now add in the civilian population, many of whom are veterans, hunters, former law enforcement, who own military-grade semi-automatic rifles, know how to use them, and in many cases have trained for exactly this kind of scenario. You are not fighting an army, you are fighting an entire nation. This is what Yamamoto understood in 1942. He wasn't being poetic when he talked about rifles behind every blade of grass. He was running the numbers. His intelligence reports told him that an American land invasion would not be met by uniformed soldiers alone. It would be met by farmers, veterans, hunters, millions of armed civilians who had no intention of surrendering. That calculation hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten more extreme now. I want to be careful here. I'm not making a political argument about gun ownership. I'm making a military strategic one. And the military strategic reality is stark. Any invading force would face asymmetric guerrilla warfare from a civilian population that is, by raw numbers, one of the most heavily armed in human history. The logistics of suppressing that alone, before you even thought about engaging the actual military, would be catastrophically draining. And then there is the thing that nobody in these conversations likes to say out loud: the nuclear deterrent. The United States maintains a nuclear triad: land-based ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and nuclear-capable bombers. The submarine component alone is nearly impossible to fully eliminate in a first strike. Ohio-class submarines carry up to 24 Trident II missiles. Each missile can carry multiple independently targeted warheads. A single submarine has enough firepower to end multiple civilizations. What this means strategically: any nation that attempted a full-scale invasion of the United States would have to simultaneously destroy America's entire nuclear capability, land, sea, and air, in a first strike so fast and so complete that no response was possible. Military analysts have run this scenario. The consensus? It cannot be done. The sea-based leg of the triad alone makes it mathematically impossible. So we've established the geography is impossible, the terrain is a nightmare, the civilian population is armed at a scale no invading force has ever encountered, and the nuclear deterrent makes a clean military victory essentially theoretical. But here's what I think is the most underrated layer of all. Every great military defeat in history comes back to the same thing. Not courage, not weapons, not even numbers. Logistics. Napoleon didn't lose in Russia because the Russian army beat him. He lost because he couldn't feed, supply, or shelter 600,000 men across thousands of miles of hostile territory, as winter set in. Hitler made the exact same mistake in 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Massive initial victories. Then, the supply lines stretched too thin. The wrong equipment for Russian winters. And the whole enterprise collapsed under its own weight. Now apply that lesson to the United States. An invading force would need to supply millions of soldiers across a country that is roughly 2,800 miles wide and 1,900 miles tall. They would need fuel, food, ammunition, medical supplies, replacement equipment, constantly at massive scale. All of that supply chain would be exposed to air attack, exposed to guerrilla interdiction, stretched across terrain that actively works against you, and dependent on port facilities that the U.S. would destroy before retreating. The U.S. military itself spends enormous resources studying logistics. They know better than anyone that you don't win wars with heroism alone. You win them by being able to move stuff, fuel, food, bullets, to the right place at the right time at scale, consistently. Any invading force would need to replicate that infrastructure from scratch, on American soil, under fire. It has never been done in the modern era. By anyone. Against a major industrial power. Here's something that gets forgotten in modern conversations about military power. Industrial capacity is a weapon. During World War II, the United States produced more war material than every other combatant nation combined. It built 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 8,800 naval vessels. It did this while also feeding the Allied armies, while also supplying the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, while also maintaining a functioning domestic economy. No nation on Earth has ever matched that scale of production, before or since. And here's the thing. That industrial capacity doesn't disappear in peacetime. It goes dormant. If the United States faced an existential threat, an actual invasion of its homeland, that industrial machine would switch back on. Hard. The country that invented mass production, that turned car factories into tank factories in 90 days during World War II. That has the largest domestic energy reserves of any industrialized nation. You are not just fighting the army that exists today, you're fighting the army that would exist in 6 months, a year, 2 years. Every month of war, America gets stronger, historically speaking, not weaker. That is a strategic nightmare for any invading force. I want to take a step back here, because I think there's a layer to this that most military analysis misses. Yamamoto studied in the United States. He attended Harvard. He served as a naval attaché in Washington, D.C. He spoke English. He understood American culture in a way that most Japanese military leaders did not. And what he understood, what kept him up at night, wasn't the weapons. Americans have a very specific relationship with the idea of being told what to do by a foreign power. It is a culture that was literally founded on armed rebellion against an empire. The Revolutionary War wasn't fought by a professional army. It was fought by militias, farmers, merchants, regular people who picked up rifles. That mythology, the armed citizen defending his home, is not just history in America, it is identity. You can agree with that or not. You can find it troubling or inspiring. But from a purely strategic standpoint, if you're a general planning an invasion, you have to account for a population that has been culturally conditioned for 250 years to resist exactly what you're trying to do. That psychological factor is incalculable. And Yamamoto calculated it anyway, and said no. Now, and this is important, I want to be honest with you. There is one scenario that military strategists say could theoretically crack the United States. And it doesn't involve a beach landing or a missile barrage. It involves making the United States destroy itself from the inside. Economic warfare. Cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Disinformation campaigns designed to deepen political fractures. Proxy conflicts that drain American resources and public support. The greatest threat to American military dominance, the thing that keeps defense analysts genuinely worried, is not a foreign army landing on the California coast. It is a slow erosion, a grinding down of institutional trust. A country so divided and so distracted that it loses the collective will to resist. Because that, the cohesion of the civilian population, the shared identity, the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself, is ultimately what all of those rifles and aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines are built on top of. The physical defenses are formidable because the society that built them was united enough and industrious enough and committed enough to build them. If that foundation cracks, that's the scenario nobody wants to talk about. So let's bring this full circle. Why is invading the United States impossible? It's not just the military, though the military is extraordinary. It's the oceans that function as natural moats no navy has ever successfully crossed for an amphibious assault. It's the terrain. 3.8 million square miles of forests, mountains, deserts, and rivers that make occupying even a fraction of this country a logistical catastrophe. It's the civilian population, 335 million people, 400 million firearms, millions of veterans, in a culture that has been primed since its founding to resist foreign occupation. It's the nuclear deterrent. The submarine fleet alone makes a disarming first strike essentially impossible. It's the industrial capacity, the sleeping giant problem that Japan accidentally woke up in 1941 and never recovered from. And it's the psychology, the cultural DNA of a nation that, whatever its internal divisions, has historically shown a remarkable capacity to unify when the existential stakes are clear. Yamamoto understood all of this, not because he was defeatist, because he was honest. He knew the difference between a battle you could win and a war you could not. The most dangerous military power in the world isn't necessarily the one with the biggest guns. It's the one where every single citizen, every farmer, every veteran, every teacher with a rifle in their closet considers themselves the last line of defense. That is what makes the United States uninvadable. Not the Pentagon, not the aircraft carriers, the 400 million rifles behind every blade of grass. Here's the thought I want to leave you with. The greatest superpowers in history, Rome, the Mongols, the British Empire, Napoleon's France, they all fell, not because someone beat them militarily at their peak. Fell because they overextended, because the cost of maintaining dominance outpaced the will and resources to sustain it. The real question for America, the one that historians will argue over for centuries, isn't whether it can be invaded. It's whether the internal fractures that every empire eventually develops will do what no foreign army ever could. That's the question worth losing sleep over. If you think about history the way I do, not as a list of dates but as a set of patterns that keep repeating themselves, then you're in the right place. Every week on this channel, we take the biggest questions about power, strategy, and human nature, and we dig into the history that most textbooks skip. Not because it's fun trivia, because the patterns from 1941, from 1812, from the fall of Rome, they're still running. Right now, in the headlines you read today. If you want to understand the present by understanding the past, subscribe. Hit the bell, because the next video is going to connect some dots that I genuinely think will change how you see the world. I'll see you there.